So it's getting pretty chilly here. I think it's getting pretty chilly around the country. We were in the 80s for about 2 weeks. So it got cold, then got hot again, and now it's cold. And tonight I think we're getting below freezing. So today it's raining, cold, and although I can take my camera out in the rain, I had to put what's called a water mod on it in order to do that. And when I put the water mod on, it becomes soundproof. So you can't really hear me talk. So I got to put a phone in my pocket with a microphone, and then I get the audio on the phone and I try to match it up to the lips movement of the camera. So I thought I'd just do a video inside today. And it's something I haven't really thought about showing you guys how to do. I've talked a lot about the wood stove and the EPA requirements. A few things to get started with. As you may have remembered, I just painted the wood stove. We got some high temperature paint, and it's been through 3 or 4 burns now. Doing great. It's held up quite nicely. It's just so beautiful. We bought a pan, a cookie sheet to put on top of it. That way if we want to cook anything or put our coffee pot on it, the coffee pot or the pot or anything isn't sitting directly on the wood stove. I noticed first thing after we did it, it left a black mark right on the cookie sheet. So I guess that means that the coffee pot was deteriorating the paint. I mean, there was a lot of things going on up here. We were cooking and grease, and it was just a mess. So we're going to do a little bit better job because we want to preserve the wood stove. I would really like for it to last the rest of my life. Now, this is an EPA efficient wood stove. Talked about that many times. The EPA gets more tighter requirements each year. This one's an 85% efficient. And the way I like to think about that, and it's not totally true, is 85% of the wood is being burned inside the wood stove instead of going out the chimney. When you see smoke going out the chimney, that means that you have wood particles going into the air and not burning inside the wood stove. So these air burners or reburners or air tubes, whatever you want to call them, actually heat up and take that smoke and burn it. Burns the smoke. If you ever want to do an experiment, get a candle, light it up, blow it out, and then light the smoke. You'll see that the smoke will light the candle back up. That's exactly what's happening here, where that smoke hits that hot burner and it catches on fire. So it's burning 85% of the material. I like to just call it, it's burning all the wood, all the smoke. Also, it keeps creosote down in the chimney. Now, in order to do this, in order to make this work correctly, you gotta have dry firewood. It's gotta be seasoned. I watched a live feed of someone and I asked them, do they have a moisture meter to determine what their moisture level of their firewood is? He said, oh yeah, I don't use it because I know that if I cut it in the early season, by the winter time it's dry. Well, I could tell it wasn't. If your glass is getting stained black, then you know you have a creosote problem, which means you have a water problem, which means your firewood is not seasoned. Now, folks in the Northwest are going to scream at me, but you're not supposed to run pine in this either because that sap is water. And so that creosote will build up on the window, of course. And somebody said in the comment section, you finally convinced me to dry my firewood so I can have a clean window. He didn't care about the chimney. See, if your chimney gets clogged up, you can cause a creosote fire in the chimney. It can burn your house down. I've had 2 chimney fires. When we first moved here, the first year we moved here, we didn't have dry firewood. So I'm going to set this up and I want to show you how I do it. So I get a couple small pieces of wood and I lay them what we're going to call north and south. And I separate them out. So now I have it set up so I got 2 pieces laying north and south, and I'm putting my kindling in between it. Now, some people will tell you to put the kindling in differently, and I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, and then the next, I'm going to put 2 pieces a little bit bigger, east and west. That's not big enough. I've laid all this out, hoping I can make this easier so you didn't have to watch me rifling through all the firewood. And then finally, I'm going to lay 1 piece on top here, like that. Depending on how high your wood pile gets at this point, you might be able to put another small piece east and west again. But you don't want your wood level to get higher than the fire brick. So here's the fire brick right here. You don't want to get it higher than that. That way your air tubes right here have room to breathe, because that's where the majority of your air comes in at, is through these air tubes. I know that all the macho men in the world are going to tell me that I shouldn't be using this, that I should use newspaper, do it like real men. Well, first of all, if SHTF, because that's what they're talking about, stuff hits the fan, I'm not really sure where you're going to get newspaper. It's going to be just as hard to find as this stuff. So what you're going to be doing is trying to figure out how to rub two sticks together and light that first. So it's going to be much more difficult. But, you know, not being a man, not using newspaper, well, it's my opinion that Carolyn said she's cold, so I better get some heat in here quickly. I think, you know, taking care of your family is a pretty manly thing to do. So I'm going to use this. It makes it quick and easy. Now, I've heard in the comment section that there are some folks who are scared to use this. It's just not that hard. You turn on the valve here. You got a little clicker. That's it. It's not dangerous. I mean, I guess you could be scared that it might blow up, but I've never heard of that happening. Now, I'm going to light the kindling on fire here. This is a full tank, and so when you lean the full tank over too far like this, it puts the flame out. You may have heard the sound difference. So what's happening is that the propane is just now shooting into the wood, and all the heat that it was already generated before it went out is causing a flame. I just let it go. It seems to actually catch fire faster. Now, this wood has been drying for, I think, 4 years now, 3 or 4 years. Each year, this gets so much easier to light. I mean, it just instantly catches on fire. The more seasoned the firewood is, the better this thing works. Previous years, we were making our logs quite a bit bigger around when we put them in. And I was noticing that I would have to start the fire at 5 a.m., then again around 10 or 11 a.m., maybe noon, and then again around 5 or 6. What we would end up doing, though, is sit around cold, because I didn't want to start the fire until about the time I went to bed. That way we'd have a nice warm house at night. This year, Carolyn has been splitting this firewood a lot thinner. And the reason she's been doing that is because we had a pile out there that was kind of like our junk pile. Anytime we'd find a log last year that was wet, green, we set it aside and we were going to use it this year. So she's been splitting each one of those and checking to make sure the moisture content has finally come into range, which is less than 20%. So she's been having to split it pretty small. What we noticed, though, is we're not having to light the wood stove any more than we used to. Now, I will admit that I'm getting better at tolerating the cold. So like last year, I would start the wood stove at about 68 degrees in the house. Well, this year I'm starting at about 64. Right now it's 66 in here. I wanted to start it a little early today because I wanted to make this video. But I could wait another hour probably before I had to light it. So that helps, I would imagine. The other thing is last year it would get really hot in here. So, I don't know, close to 90 degrees, sometimes over 90 degrees. Well, that was uncomfortable to Carolyn. So, me adapting just a few extra degrees has made a big difference. Using less wood, because we're cutting it smaller, so we may use less than a cord. Normally we use a cord of wood each year. It would be great if we used less. It's not getting so terribly hot in here. Now, one of the things that you'll see on YouTube, a lot of YouTubers will say, is you want to put your kindling on top. I was telling you I was going to explain how others do it. You put it on top and you get this top-down burn. And they say it does a better job. I've tried it and I didn't see any significant difference. So I do it this way. And like I said, as long as your wood is dry, look how fast that lit up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit with the door slightly cracked. The instruction says for about 15 minutes, and that's about right. Even though the window doesn't get stained, if I shut this too early, without the burners being hot enough, the smoke will accumulate inside the wood stove. That dust starts to accumulate on the window. That smoke dust, it's not wet, So you can take a sock and wipe it right off without any scrubbing. Now, I will say, before I go too much further, that if you do get that stain, all you got to do is get a wet towel and put ash on it. It's the easiest thing in the world to clean once you put that ash on it. Don't know what makes a huge difference with the ash, but that's what works. With that dust, yeah, it's just not as pretty. I like keeping the glass clean. But if you get it hot enough in here before you shut the door, then you don't have that problem. Several things occurs with that heat. First of all, I've taken a laser tester at that 15-minute mark, and it gets about 500 degrees up here, 450, 500 degrees. The other thing you're doing is you're heating the chimney up. So as you know, heat rises. So once you get that heat, doing that motion, getting up there quickly, you're getting enough air in here, you're not smoking the whole thing up, you've got everything hot enough so the smoke is catching fire. Now, the way you regulate the temperature is with this knob right here. You push it in, it slows down the flame. This is once the door is closed, obviously. That way you don't need that flapper up there. Everybody talks about that flapper. You got to have that flapper because it keeps the heat inside the wood stove. Heat rises. That flapper is not going to stop the heat. What you're doing is you're restricting the airflow, which means you're restricting those air tubes, which means you're losing efficiency. Also, people will say, well, I use wet wood in there so it'll keep a flame throughout the night, or coals or whatever it is they want. I don't have any problems keeping this house warm. I woke up this morning at 62 degrees, so it was 2 degrees colder than I wanted it to be. What we could have done, instead of me lighting it right before I went to bed, Carolyn could have lit it before she goes to bed. She goes to bed a little bit later than me. And that would have worked out perfectly. So 62 degrees, that still wasn't too bad. What I want to do is I want to keep this house above 60 degrees all winter long, because we have to keep that water tank outside warm. So I have ventilation up there with a fan that blows hot air into that box outside that has my water tank. When it gets really cold, like single digits or below zero, then I got to keep it pretty hot in here, 70 degrees or so I keep that warm. So if I didn't have that tank, it wouldn't matter what the temperature got to down at nighttime. You just put extra blankets on and you stay warm. When you get up, you light the wood stove, and within a half hour, the place is warm. Now remember, we live in a tiny house, so this works out pretty well for us. I am really happy that this year we were able to work it out that we get to use less firewood. Carolyn seems much happier this year. She's not, sweating to death. Last year, she would have to go outside at least 3 or 4 times a day just to cool off. It was so hot in here. So I will admit, when the door is open, you saw that spark, you do need to watch carefully where that spark lands. Hopefully it lands in that tray. This morning when I lit it, there was a spark here out on the floor. So you just look over, keep an eye on it while that door is open. That's about the most unsafe time when you're lighting the wood stove, is that door is being open, other than if you're running wet firewood and you're creosote in the chimney. So this year I haven't seen her going outside or getting cranky because it's so hot. So that first year I was here and we had that wet firewood. You imagine this ambiance of a wood stove and the beauty of it. You see it in movies, you see those fake fireplaces all the time, and there's just something really romantic about it. Well, that first year there was nothing romantic about it. It was hard to light, it was hard to deal with, the windows were always stained. You had to keep this thing lit non-stop, otherwise you couldn't get it to light. It was terribly difficult to get it to light. As a matter of fact, one person said, I would never bought one of those, I have one, you can't light it. It's because you had wet firewood. But now that we are in the 3rd year and we have definitely gotten dry firewood, even last year it was a little bit wet. Every now and then you would put a log in there and you'd see water boiling out of the log. After 2 years of oak drying, you would still see that. It would start to spit onto the window and you'd have little spots that would be stained. I haven't had any of that this year. This year, now we've got the wood stove painted, the glass is perfectly clean. There is a real romantic ambiance about this now. It's so nice. Now, somebody will say, it's called carbon monoxide. There's no carbon monoxide. I have 2 carbon monoxide detectors in here. But I will say that when this thing is lit and you're getting ready to go to sleep, it just instantly puts you to sleep. you won't see it in the camera. I can look at the camera now and I can see it's not there, but when I look over here, there are blue flames starting to show. And there's something about those blue flames. What happens is that smoke hits the air tubes. Now, I don't have this open, so it's not working perfectly. But those blue flames somehow, I do think, trigger something in your brain to go to sleep. There's no downside to running dry firewood, is what I'm trying to say. Everything about it is positive. Well, the EPA is telling me to do it. I ain't doing it. Well, then you're going to burn more firewood. The wet firewood, it takes 70% of the energy that you're putting into the wood stove to burn that water. These things hold the heat for hours. Like I said, it lit at 5 o'clock this morning. Here it is noon. And it's just now getting to a point where it was starting to get where it wasn't warm to the touch anymore. So if you'll click this up next box, it'll take you to a video where I was talking about how been drafted in the Army. So hope I can inspire you to find the romance when you're living your dreams. Thanks for watching.